Hello and welcome to the Yale Center for British Arts online series At Home, Artists in Conversation. I am Carmen Juliá and I am delighted to welcome artist Katy Moran to the program today. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping notes. Please note that this program will be recorded, your camera and sound are muted and will remain so throughout the program. We will be using the Q&A feature located on your navigation bar to gather your questions for Katy, and they will be answered at the end of the program. But please feel free to submit your questions at any time. If you would like closed captioning, a live transcript is available by clicking the icon on your navigation bar. Yale University acknowledges that Indigenous people and nations, including Mohegan, Mashantucket, Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Scatinco, Golden Hill Powasset, Nihantic, and the Quinnipiac and other Algonquin-speaking people have stewarded through generations the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these people and nations and this land. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce Katy Moran. Born in Manchester, Moran is a contemporary artist known for her powerful and evocative abstract paintings. Her work explores color, composition, and gesture, and sometimes suggests landscape, portraiture, or still life. Her ideas emerge from the process of painting. She often shifts or rotates the canvas while painting, reworks textures, and reconsiders the shapes and figures that appear, looking at the painting from different angles until every part of it works. Sometimes Moran identifies the subject of a painting in its title. Other works have titles that are autobiographical or seemingly arbitrary. Her painting, Black Bear from 2008, is in the collection of the Yale Center for British Art. Moran lives and works in Hertfordshire. Welcome, Katy.
Thank you.
Hi. So we are going to start by focusing these conversations around a number of works that you have selected, obviously, and you have selected them for very particular reasons, and they represent different moments in your career and different approaches to making. So let's go with the first one, which should be coming up. Here. Lockdown, Liam Green from 2020. So this work was made during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I guess it was during one of the many lockdowns when we were all asked to be at home, to stay at home. So tell us a little bit about why have you chosen this painting, and also why going back to the pandemic?
Well, it's funnily enough, it's one of my favorite paintings, which is interesting because I'm going to talk about the element of surrender and the idea that when you surrender to what is, I suppose with COVID, that would be seemingly adversity, you know, positive things can come out of it. So it is one of my favorite paintings, but also to go back to the pandemic, I don't watch the news. So the first time that the reality of COVID hit me was actually when I was walking home from school with my kids. And one of my friends said that the schools would likely close down. And that's when it really hit me. I went into the studio the next day and I started making this painting. And it was quite figurative, and it was like a medieval kind of city. And it was really nasty colors and kind of noxious fumes were circling around it. And in that moment, I realized that I was feeling fear and anxiety about the COVID situation. And I kind of stopped in that moment and I thought, I literally said to myself, no, Katy, go within. And I recognize that fear is the opposite of creativity. You know, you want freedom from fear to be creative. And I had been walking to my studio every day, and I'd been quite inspired by all the greenery that I would walk past, the trees. It was like a viewpoint where there was all this sort of layering of greens and hedges and trees that really struck me. I was also doing some work with a Feng Shui master. So I was doing 2 meditations a day where I would visualize emptying out old belief systems, unhelpful belief systems that were seen as occupying physical space in the body. And then I would replace them with colors, one such color being green, which represents healing. And basically then I made this painting, which I felt was inspired more by these influences, you know, than the fearful kind of anxious response that I felt in the studio to COVID. And then recently, I reread The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle for the second time. And there was a quote in it that resonated with me in relation to this experience, and in relation to what I've been thinking about more and more recently. Shall I read the...
Sure, yeah, go ahead, please.
Because we live in such a mind-dominated culture, most modern art, architecture, music, and literature are devoid of beauty, of inner essence, with very few exceptions. The reason is that the people who create those things cannot, even for a moment, free themselves from their mind. So they are never in touch with that place within where true creativity and beauty arise. The mind left to itself creates monstrosities, and not only in art galleries. Look at our urban landscapes and industrial wastelands. No civilization has ever produced so much ugliness. So when I read that quote, you know, it's quite scathing. I was thinking, you know, don't sit on the fence, say what you really think. I think it's very interesting to think about.
Yeah, and you often talk about this divide between, you know, a culture that is very much mind dominated, and as opposed to a more intuitive culture, the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, you know, and how to bring kind of find the right balance, I guess, because you've said you don't want to leave anything out, but there is something. Is there something in this painting about trying to find that balance between, you know, and over intellectualized work and like a much more intuitive one?
Definitely. At this time, I was also interested in the notion of surrender, both in a way of being in life and also in my painting, as in surrendering to what is, you know, COVID, lockdown, whatever is happening in life, but also in the painting, and not as a resignation to mediocrity or out of apathy, but in a belief that when you drop the resistance to things, the things that you want flow to you more easily. You know, the Rumi, the 13th century poet Rumi, who he wrote quite a famous poem which talks about, it goes along the lines of, when I run after what I think I want, my days are a furnace of distress and anxiety. When I sit in my place of patience, what I want flows to me, is looking for me. And so, yeah, it's this idea of getting out of the ego, or the dissolution of the ego, because, you know, stress is self-created. You know, it's when we think we're not on a path that we should be on, and concepts like good, bad, right, wrong, they're all of the egoic mind. And so I'm interested in, yes, what happens when you tap into a different state of consciousness, but also, as I said to you about the Tao Te Ching, which is translated as the Book of the Way, and the Lao Tzu talks about this idea of doing, not doing. You know, he says that an athlete can get into a state of body awareness where the right movement or the right stroke will happen by itself, effortlessly, without any interference of conscious will. And that is the paradigm for non-action. And in that way, you know, the poem writes the poem, the painting makes the painting. So I'm interested in that kind of removal of conscious will as well. Like you say, using intuition, tapping more into the intuitive voice.
That's, I was just thinking of a quote by Lee Krasner, who talks about her process of painting, and she says, you just stand there and take a deep breath and hope for the best and get into it. And sometimes, as I say, it comes through miraculously. And I just feel that there is something there of, you know, what you're saying, that kind of something comes to you and that makes the gesture, and that it starts kind of building up the painting, the image, the colors, everything. How do you find your process? How could you, like, when you stand in front of a painting, what is the first thing you do?
That is very interesting. I think into relation to what I just said, I don't plan what I'm going to paint, but I go into the studio with a head full of inspiration, of possible ways that I want something to go, of intention to start the painting. So I will often follow that intention. But it's this awareness that if things come in that are foreign or surprising or not part of that intention, it's being kind of hyper aware and present enough to be the watcher, if you like, the kind of witness consciousness that sees that that's coming in and just waits or just stops to see whether that is a preferable way to go, if you like. This is where the intuitive voice is really important in that respect. I was reading, it's one of the books by Stephen Kotler, but he talks about this mountain climber called Dean Potter, and he climbed some of the world's most dangerous mountains in record time. And he free solos, which is like the mother of all death sports. Basically, he does it alone with no ropes or anything. And he spends a lot of time in solitude and meditating in order to strengthen what he calls the voice, which is his intuitive voice, because he says without that, he wouldn't be alive. Like, it's literally a death scenario. He follows that voice, and that's what stops him getting killed. And you know, for me, it might not be the survival, it's not my survival, but it might be the survival of the painting. And it's these voices that are coming through in the studio. And I just started thinking recently about differentiating, because I didn't think it was possible to differentiate what is a conscious thought or a rational thought or an intellectual thought, and what is an intuitive voice. And it's this idea that the intuitive voice is felt, whereas an intellectual impulse or inclination, in terms of where I take the painting, would be thought. Anyway, it's this kind of hyper awareness of the voices as I'm making the painting, and how much I trust that in the process, and how flexible I'm willing to be in that process.
What do you mean by how flexible are you willing to be?
Well, just in terms of what I was talking about, surrendering in life, you know, we often have belief systems. We think we should be a certain place or things should go a certain way. And that can then make a certain rigidity. Whereas if you drop that, you are much more flexible and open to the things that suggest themselves through the painting, accidents, chance, things that come in that are foreign, that may be slightly perturbing because I don't recognize them even. But the awareness in the moment to understand that and then sit with that and allow for that and either keep that or change that.
So you made this work in Hertfordshire after you have been living in London for many years. And then you moved to Hertfordshire, which is much of a rural landscape, right? And now your studio is outside of your home and you have this walk. And I was just wondering, because does nature has a place in your practice? Is that, or do you feel, you know, has it ever influenced it? I mean, you were talking about this walk, but obviously it wasn't the walk or, you know, just being outside in nature, but actually how you translated that into meditation, right? So I was just wondering, you know, is nature important for you for your work?
Yes, it never used to be. When I was living in London for 15 years, I was never inspired by nature. And then since moving out to Hertfordshire, I was struck immediately by the difference in the light. I think it was of pollution and these open spaces of blue, so blue sky, very influenced by that. And then on the walk to the studio, interested in this idea of, like I was saying to you, forest bathing. You know, Japanese call it Shinro-yuko. This idea also that Deepak Chopra talks about nature's intelligence. And the phrase, I think, is, you know, communing with nature. And when we commune with nature, we receive well, nature's intelligence, creativity, etc. So I feel the walk, I think movement helps creativity anyway. I think the subconscious starts working on things the minute you start moving, but then there's this added layer. Like, for instance, I really enjoy being out early in the morning when the animals outnumber the people and you hear them, and it's like an orchestra. You know, the noise that they make. And I feel that this kind of charges humans up, and we need it for balance, for creativity. But I would feel very literal inspiration walking through woodlands. Certain colors would pop or certain patterns. And then I, like this with the lockdown lind, the green, for example, different colors, reds, yellows, the blue, the sky. But so yeah, I think it definitely has had an impact, and I use it in my day as a tool, if you like. Yeah, a tool to help with painting.
I think perhaps we can move on to the next one because we're going to run out of time otherwise. But there are questions about the frame, for example. But I think we can probably come back to that because obviously the frame is such a kind of feature of your work, right? So we go to Lady Things, which is the second painting that you have selected. And this takes us back to 2009. And this work was made in Ben Nicholson's oldest studio during a residency in Tate St. Ives. And it's currently in the Tate's collection, which is Great. So what was, I was wondering, what's the experience working in Ben Nicholson's studio and in St. Ives? I guess this relationship to that 1950s, you know, like painting, British painting, was it any connection there for you?
I definitely have a connection with the place, St. Ives. Like from a young age, we used to go on holiday there every summer. So it has sentimental value for me, the place. Then to have that studio, I mean, I'm a fan of Ben Nicholson's work. You know, it's an absolute dream to have that. It was a gorgeous studio. And yeah, you looked out onto the window and you could see, you know, the sun was right there. The beach was just there. So, and all the traces of his presence were still there. You know, it's quite well worn. There were markings and paint spillages and things. So yeah, it was amazing, but a mixed experience.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I was pregnant when I went down there for this residency, and then during the residency I had a miscarriage, and then I made this painting while I was still there on the residency, so the title alludes to that, but also, like I was saying to you, alludes to the fact that a lot of my female friends and family then came out and told me that they had also had miscarriages, and that it was this kind of taboo thing that we didn't really speak about. And the feeling at the time, like I was saying to you, that I think the reason I chose this painting was, when I make paintings, I don't normally feel like a gender. Genderless in the studio. But when I was pregnant or in the early stages of motherhood, I couldn't escape feeling like a woman. I mean, literally sometimes I couldn't even physically get around a canvas because my pregnant stomach was so big. But I was thinking, about the energy of this painting also, because it ended up in an all-female exhibition, a traveling show with Tate, which was based on the writings of Virginia Woolf. So I'm quite interested in the energy of that. And it's like I was saying to you at that time, when I was pregnant and when I was a mother, it felt like it was something you didn't really speak about too much, because it felt like you were somehow out of the game or distracted. And I take that to mean that at that time it was very much a patriarchal society with a preference for masculine energy. And more and more recently, I've become very mindful of masculine and female energy. And masculine energy is to do, and feminine energy is to be. And I've felt since that time, I've seen more people, and men particularly, champion things that are more of what would be traditionally considered feminine energy, such as intuition, like I was saying to you, or challenging the patriarchal work ethic, and incorporating the value of rest and hobbies and deep play, etc. And then also carrying right through to the shows that I've seen recently, like I was saying to you, the Caroline Schneemann show.
Yeah, there's a stronger presence of women artists today than there was at 2009. Definitely, and there's also like a chance to see more historical figures also, which, you know, they haven't always been that present. And I was just wondering, you know, what you say about these things that you couldn't share, like motherhood or even, you know, having a miscarriage. And I feel like the title Lady Things, it really encapsulate that kind of things that have to be secret, or things that have to just be kept to you, because they're just your lady things, and there's always these kind of, right, these conception that some things can't be shared, some things about womanhood, about being a woman, just can't be shared. They have to be kept to yourself because they're not, or there was, I think things have changed dramatically. But yeah, when you were making that painting, did it feel like that?
It did feel like that in retrospect. But I think the title, yeah, it is quite secretive, but I see a cartoon character in this painting. And when I look at the palette of it, it does seem quite light and quite optimistic.
It does. I mean, I think it has that muted palette that really kind of is very subdued. And you were talking about it like being like cotton, you know, like cotton and all things like soft, right? And it does have that, and it definitely doesn't have like a, I don't know, anything, a negative connotation there or anything. You wouldn't assume that there's a story behind it, that is a story, you know, of someone being hurt and, you know, of miscarriage. Definitely not.
Challenging time, but maybe, you know, it was transmuted through the painting, something else. But I
was reading like some of the reviews at this time, you know, 2009 and a little bit earlier, when you started to have like you had a lot of shows in the UK and in the US at that time, and one thing in relationship to these that we're talking about, that, you know, one thing that surprised me is that how the reviews, they often compare your work to male artists. And, you know, there was mentions to Pollock, to Howard Hodgkin, to Bacon, but never, they would never never mention women artists, which I thought it was really, really strange. And obviously with exhibitions like Action, Gesture, Paint at the Whitechapel, you know, there's so many historical references there. I wonder again, that's a sign of the time that was so much more male dominated.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you were saying, one of the reasons I chose this painting is because I was reading about one of the artists in the Whitechapel show, and it was something very incidental, just a little mention about her making art in a kitchen where her children were. And I just thought, do I still feel a little starved of these anecdotes about painting and the female experience? And when I think about, you know, there must be so many women who've had miscarriages, but when I try and think about how many women painters have made paintings following a miscarriage or about a miscarriage, I can't think of many. I don't know. And so, and like you're saying, when my work has been compared to male artists, that's our cultural frame of reference, isn't it? Historically, like when you reach for something, like if I was ever asked what my favorite painting was, I would reach for de Kooning, Excavation. And now I'm mindful to reach for Helen Frankenthaler because I love her paintings. But so this is what I mean. I feel there was a preference for this kind of masculine energy to the point that we wouldn't talk about these things, about God, you know. And you know, there's a book that I read by Alex Sujong Kim Pang called Rest, which has been really influential for me, but he basically argues the case. It's unfortunate that, again, it's referring to male figures in history, but that argues that they were geniuses because they had hobbies, because they had other things in their life, because they only worked a few hours a day. And, you know, you would include looking after children. He has a chapter devoted to the deep play. You know, you think about looking after children, that is deep play at its best, you know. And so the richness of those experiences that can then be brought into painting are endless. But like you say, I feel things have changed, and I feel very much now I'm aware of this balance of masculine and feminine energy that is inherent in both of us. And for balance in the individual and balance in the world and harmony, we need both. And I'm very mindful of what happens. I've called quite a few paintings titles with lady in them, just to see what happens with the energy of these paintings. But also, just like we're saying about exhibitions, what energy is being supported or validated or celebrated. But equally mindful, because Eckhart Tolle again talks about the pain body, and there's the individual woman's pain body and the collective female pain body, which is like the collective pain body is all the subjugation that women have endured throughout history. The individual pain body is the story of your individual trauma as a woman. But if you get stuck in that and that becomes an identity, it takes you away from your true essence. So I'm mindful of perpetrating something, and I want it to be, you know, seen as an optimistic thing. Yeah.
I was want to ask you about this painting also, because here there were some collage elements here in this painting, right? If I'm sorry, there were some collage elements in this painting, if I'm correct, right? Like at the top, there's you stuck things on the surface, and I guess it was just a different. I'm just wondering about how your painting has changed in terms of how you approach them, how you approach ways of making. I remember at this time in 2009, you talked about, you know, you were looking at images on your phone or found images and things like that. And I wonder if that's still in your painting, or if those elements are no longer there.
Looking at images on my phone and color.
Yeah, like yeah, exactly. Which seemed to be like quite dominant at that time, the time that you made lady things. But yeah, I wonder if you're still working with those, or just working with found paintings the way you do now.
I think, yeah, when I was using collage a lot in those years, I was pregnant twice and I didn't feel very well. I didn't have a lot of physical energy, and I feel the collage was more manageable for me. But I also wanted to invest more time on each individual piece. Up until that point, I'd been very preoccupied by a fresh, kind of quick, spontaneous approach to making paintings. And I wanted to slow that down and spend time. But the collage elements come back a little bit. You know, I was talking to you about making paintings with my bum, using the print. And then obviously that would always be round. So now I sometimes use masking tape to mask off certain shapes and then bum print those. Sometimes the masking tape will get embedded in the paint, and so in that way it stays. I'm also quite interested in layering up with collage and then ripping away as I paint, that sort of element of erasure, but also tricking the mind, because you kind of trick the mind that you're going in a certain direction and then you rip it all off. And I like the energy of that and the surprise element of that. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of energy. We're going to move on to the next slide. Because there is a lot of energy in your latest series, which is More Me, which is your most recent work, right? And it's been recently shown at the Station Gallery in Melbourne. And
Yes.
Some of them, okay, and I believe that's the first time that you exhibit in Australia. And also, well, tell us a little bit about these series.
So I titled them More Me, all of them, to kind of punctuate this moment as an aid to remember what was going on. I've been very interested in securing and optimizing flow state in the studio when working. And as I was saying to you, I read a couple of Stephen Kotler books, and he talks a lot about how to optimize flow state and how to cultivate it. And one of the ways is through meditation. One of the ways he talks about is through psychedelics, through microdosing. But I did a transcendental meditation course recently, and one of the benefits of that is that it promotes self-actualization, which means that we are operating at the height of our potential and expressing our unique potential, if you like, our individual expression. And I had this moment making this series where I felt that the nature of the paint, the particularities of the paint, and my preoccupations with those particularities were coming through with clarity. And I felt that that could be a possible moment of self-actualization. And I titled the paintings More Me. Yeah, as an aid.
I love the title. I have to say, I really love the title. I just feel like it's so unapologetic, and it's so like, here I am, this is me, you know.
It sounds quite egotistical, doesn't it?
But you know,
I'm interested in the dissolution of
it is, but no, it's not so much in you know, in an egotistic way, but like it just in an honest way, you know. This is me.
Yeah.
This is what I can do, you know. It's kind of more me. And I like that in many of these paintings you can see the work that is underneath the painting in which you've painted. Can you talk a little bit about that process of acquiring like these kind of paintings? You do it in eBay and Amazon these days, right?
Actually, well, I have a salvage shop in London where the people there keep them for me. But I pick them up all over. I just went to see my mum in Yorkshire and I got a couple from a vintage shop, which I wasn't expecting. So that was nice. Friends buy them for me from eBay if they see them. Yeah, I have my ways.
Do you have any particular like themes or subjects like you feel attracted to when you see one of those paintings, or any particular images that you're looking for?
It's very intuitive, to be honest, but I love it when sometimes I'm thinking, like the other day I had an idea for something. I was looking at a Katy painting and there was something about the layout and composition. And I thought, yeah, I could do this shaped canvas. And then I went down into the town and found the right shaped canvas. The idea. So I love it when that happens. These kind of synchronicities. But otherwise, it's very intuitive. But they tend to be old, yes.
Yeah. It just, I mean, there's such an energy in all these paintings. So have you experienced like with kind of substances in order to
with the microdose
get to that, get to that kind of state?
I haven't, because it's not legal still in the UK. I was on a retreat in the Netherlands, and I have been interested in experimenting with that, with the two forms, the kind of slow and steady meditative process, and then the microdosing. You know, I read that Billionaires Microdose. It was Tim Ferriss wrote about it in his book, The 4-Hour Work Week, talk about billionaires like Steve Jobs microdosing, because it helps them solve complex problems, and it helps enhance pattern recognition, and drawing links between things more easily. You know, and painting is all about decision making. Also, the benefit of microdosing and psychedelics is the dissolution of the ego again, and this oneness with everyone and everything, and this then affinity with nature, which is very positive in itself, I think, when you think about our relationship to nature in terms of the environment and what's happening with climate change. That sense of promoting that sense of connectedness is very interesting. But yes, those two things together, I think, could be very beneficial for optimizing flow state.
And have you done meditation for many years?
I've done meditation for many years, but only recently did transcendental meditation.
Right. Do you feel it really helped in the way, or it changed the way you approach a painting?
I think it really helps. It helps on so many levels. There's a psychiatrist, he's called Norman Rosenthal. He's written a couple of books on the benefits of TM, and the list is endless. It really is. But I read the 2 books at the same time that I did the meditation, and that really reinforced it for me. But there were so many benefits in terms of memory, creativity, creating flow state, prioritizing, you know, in this world that we live in with constant distractions, mobile phones, emails, social media.
It's this idea of being in the now, in the present, right? And being connected to the present.
Very much.
And kind of getting diverted by all these interruptions, right?
Yes, because when you meditate twice a day, and when you spend time in, it's like the least excited form of consciousness, you then carry that through into your day, and that allows you the focus that you need, the concentration. It allows you to prioritize, to work out what's important. Yeah, I mean, it's been a massive influence in terms of cultivating the inspiration, the mindfulness.
Do you think it has influenced the way you use color? I mean, this last series is so rich in color.
Yeah, one of the other reasons I called the paintings more me is because TM is supposed to promote a deeper sense of peacefulness, inner peace, and happiness, and being more comfortable in our own skin, and in solitude, for example. And I definitely correlate color palette with happiness and well-being. I feel very much so that, yeah, the color that I'm reaching for more and more, you know, is indicative of that.
I mean, there's such a huge variety of colors in the series. You know, it's really quite surprising, like all of them in the same series. I was going to ask you, do you know when, I mean, how easy it is to decide that the work is finished, you know, it's done, move on?
I try and think of that as a fascinating process. But I will see that as a fascinating process, because otherwise it could be, I mean, it is fascinating, it's very interesting, and patience is I feel patience is a big part of it. But it's like what I was saying to you about strengthening the voice, the intuitive voice, so that it helps with this gauge of when to act, when not to act, when to leave something, when to go into something again. And
it's kind of trusting yourself, right? Or trusting the work.
Yeah, it's trusting the work, trusting the process, challenging belief systems, you know, that it has to be gung-ho and that you can just take the time and the answers will come. So yeah, I think it is trust. What am I going to say? But I have been waiting a little bit, just waiting till I really get an impulse of where I might want to take something, that it's coming through quite strongly of what I need to do. Because sometimes I look at a batch of salvage paintings and I think, this could all be so simple, could all be done so quickly if I just make the right decisions.
Well, how to make those right decisions, right?
Things I'm talking about, but obviously I enjoy the endeavor of the painting, and totally contradict myself. It happens in the process of the painting. But
I love this one here. I think it has
also the way I work. It can be very easy if I have clarity. There's no lengthy processes, because I always wanted to jump in at a place of excitement and interest from myself.
Are you quite prolific?
Yes.
And do you discard many of your paintings?
I tend to keep them around, but I don't, or I'll end up painting over them. But again, I try not to do that too hastily as well.
I was just saying that I love how much, and there's so much going on in this painting that it really excites me.
Really?
The frame, the really raw canvas around it, and then the painting inside. But we're reaching the end of this conversation. I'm mindful that there's one final work, which is Black Bear, that is in the Yale collection. So I was just wondering if you could say a few things about this painting, again back to 2008. So
a few things came up for me that I think I was thinking about at that time. There was a phase where I was quite interested in anthropomorphism. And I would hold things in my head, Disney, cartoon, book illustration, children's book illustration, and also this kind of vernacular that I had with my brother and my friends back in Manchester, when I feel that we weren't that emotionally literate, and we'd describe our emotions in terms of animals. So we'd be a sad cat or a tired cat or a angry bear. There's kind of this humor to it, but also the palette is dark, and there's this dichotomy at that time. I was very happy. There was a lot of good things happening for me in my life, but I also had PTSD and was not coping so well with that. And I was very interested in outsider art at that time, and kind of exploring the dark recesses of the mind, if you like. Also, there is a signature in the top corner, which is, and going back to what I was saying, I was very interested in the spontaneity of a painting, making a painting in one sitting, and the fresh energy of that, like a sketch. And I found it challenging to go back in, if I had done that, and add more paint marks. But sometimes I would feel the canvas needed something additional. And the signature for me was a way to add paint, but somehow have a separation, because it could be read as a signature. So it was in the painting, but it was kind of separate at the same time. But I think the fact that it ended up upside down, often with the paintings, I would see a few figurative opportunities. And so maybe I had settled on something, and then I changed my mind after I'd signed it, and so changed the orientation.
That's great, Katie. I think we're going to go to the Q&A because we have a few questions here from the audience. So I'm just going to read the first one. It's from Sumi Pereira. And they say, don't you think fear can also generate creativity and become a cathartic process and help you heal too?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I spent a long time in fear, like I just said, when I had PTSD. So I think, yes, you can channel that or kind of mine that for creative output. But in terms of a way of living and mental health and painting, I'm definitely more of the mind that I want a kind of joyous energy in the work. Another word for flow state is ecstasis, which is the idea of an exalted state of being, a kind of euphoric state of being. There was a man, I think it's called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He did a study on what makes life meaningful for people. And he found that the main thing that made life meaningful for people and worth living was flow state. So yes, I would definitely veer on the side of optimism, not fear.
Okay, we're going to move to the next one from Charlie Rosenbaum. Dear Ms. Moran, I hope I'm writing to ask for your opinion on the relationship between play and creativity. As someone who is undoubtedly familiar with the creative process, I am curious to know how you believe that play can contribute to this process. I am interested in hearing your thoughts on the value of creativity as compared to play. Do you think that one is more valuable than the other, or do they work together to produce something greater? Thank you.
That's a really good question. Yeah. I was listening to a video about the promise of psychedelics just the other day, and there was a child psychologist who was talking about this very thing. And she was saying that when we're young, children have a great ability to learn and explore multiple possibilities. They're very open to creativity, very imaginative. As we get older, we become less flexible. The brain becomes less flexible. We become very efficient at being out in the world and getting things done. But she was saying with psychedelics, they induce this the benefit of them is that they can induce this childhood state or allow us to move more easily between the two states. And she was also talking about AI, and that is something they're looking at, systems that solve this tension between being very creative, imaginative, open to multiple possibilities, but being very efficient and getting things done in the world. But also, when I was talking to you about the bomb painting, I was thinking about this other artist who's in the show at the Whitechapel, and she made paintings blindfolded, which reminded me of the childhood game, Pin the Tail on the Donkey. And I don't think it's any accident that we're trying to kind of tap into these states. And also children are able to see the world with awe and wonder. And that is something I've been trying to cultivate, where, it's as if you were just dropped down to Earth from Mars and you just see everything and the potential, and you're inspired by everything. I feel it's possible to do that. So yes, I do feel there is value, and that, again, when you're in that childhood state, there is a lack of fear. There's a lack of fear of failure, and it's about freedom and play. And I do think those things are very beneficial to creativity, for sure.
Absolutely. You don't have any filters then. There's another question here from Matilda Vivan, and would Kate be able to talk a little about her preference for acrylic rather than oil paint?
From the get-go, I just preferred the immediacy of acrylic. It was simple. you know, it was water and paint. I found with oil, I'd often get into a muddy mess, and there seemed to be processes, drying times, etc. And I never got on with it. Every now and then I'd think, oh, I must be missing something, and I'd try it again, but it never lasted long. So, yeah, I like fluid acrylic. So, yeah, it has a nice kind of runniness to it.
Like in your last series, you can see a lot of that fluidity come through. Heather Pierce is asking, when working over a found painting, does Katy start by obliterating what's there, like with primer, or is her work a reaction to what's there?
I normally really like elements of the painting, and so I'm mindful that I don't want to obscure them too quickly, and I'm kind of working with them. It's sometimes as the process goes on, I do end up obliterating it or covering it completely, but that's not my initial intention.
Sandra Stark is asking, is there any issue about the work being archival in combination with the older painting?
No, we have checked that, and I think it's fine. But there's certainly never been any instances of any issue with it.
This one about how long does each painting take to complete in the More Me series? Because each one is different, right?
Yeah, the first one that you pulled up, the kind of bluish one, I remember that took 2 sessions. So that was very immediate. That is more unusual, I would say. But they can take any length of time. That's what I like, the potential for a painting happening in any moment.
We're approaching the end. I think this is going to be the last question. I'm sorry. And Paul Ransuhov is asking, can you comment on paint spilling on the frame?
Yeah, I mean, it happens in the process because obviously the frame is on the painting from the beginning. And sometimes I feel that the marks then become integral to the composition. Equally, sometimes I want to paint over the frame again and clean it up so that it takes it back outside of the painting. So I'm interested in using the frame as a device for that. Sometimes to make space as well in the painting, to add an element of space.
Well, I think that's the last one because we reached time now. But thank you, everyone, and a very special thanks to Katy for this brilliant conversation. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. And thank you to Jane and the team at the Yale Center for British Art. And yeah, goodbye.